What was the most poignant "we have to leave now" moment that saved your life? So I was waiting at the train station to pick up a friend of mine. I was early, so I decided to stand in the sun right outside of the station. A guy with a bicycle walked up to me asking in broken English if I knew how late the train would arrive. After I answered the question, he stayed around and started talking to me. Now I know that's not weird at all, but the things he asked and the way he acted and looked just gave me a creepy vibe. Eventually, he asked if I would walk with him while he dropped his bicycle of. I didn't want to because the place to store bicycles at this station is very secluded, and to be honest, I didn't want to be alone with this guy, so I noped out and walked into the station. He started yelling at me, calling me names, but at that moment, the train came in and it got very busy, so he left. A few months later, I read this article in the local paper about a girl being raped at the station. They had put a drawing of a guy next to the article as he was not yet caught. It was the same guy. To this day, I'm very happy I didn't go with him. Edit, changed my special way of spelling bicycle to the correct way. Had a knock on my door, opened it to find some salesmen trying to get people to sign up for ATT high-speed internet. Half humored them since I wasn't thrilled about my internet, but during the conversation, one let it slip that they knew where I worked. Tried to play it off as, well, we provide service to such and such Air Force base, so we probably got your information from there. But that base has some 30K people and highly unlikely there is some comprehensive list. He started asking questions about my employment, which was pretty sensitive at the time, and the conversation was getting uncomfortable. They hadn't provided IDs at this point, so I asked, and they provided some faded, hardly legible copies and then asked to come inside. Pretty promptly shut down the conversation and told them to leave. Talked to neighbors later and no one else had them visit. Not sure what they were after. My dad had a top secret clearance, and when my husband was in the process, told him to be careful about stuff like this. They'll send random people to test you and you'll be spit roasted if you fail. I've wrote about this before. I was in a mall in Indonesia and two tourists seemed to be having problems communicating with the cashier at a bookstore, so I helped translate. They wanted to buy me drinks to thank me. Told them it's not necessary and I have to get back to my mom soon. They told me to meet them for dinner. Told them I have to have dinner at home. They told me to sneak out and meet them after dinner. At this point, a bookstore staff noticed something was wrong and went up to question them. My sister and I dashed off while they were distracted, continued wandering around the mall and realized they were following us. To see if we were just paranoid, we ducked into a lingerie store since we figured two men won't usually need to go lingerie shopping together. They followed us in, ran so quickly back to the jewelry store our mom was at. The store had intimidating security guards, and I guess that stopped those guys. I was 11, my sister was 10. Met a guy off Tinder at night. We walked around the park near his house, and he suggested we go back inside to play Mario Kart. He warned me that his place was a little messy, and I said, okay, not a problem. I go inside, and I am absolutely shocked. He's a hoarder and lives with his parents. The entire apartment smelled like cat piss. Poor cat. I was panicking on the inside because I have asthma and I am a clean freak, but I didn't want to make him feel bad. It was absolutely horrible and disgusting and so hard to breathe. I was getting some super creepy vibes from him too, and I went to the bathroom and texted my friend to call me in 5 minutes for a level 10 emergency. She called and was crying hysterically on the phone, and I quickly got up and left. In 99/100ths times, the apartment should just be a bit unvacuumed or some plates left in the sink when someone says that. Holy Some 5 years ago, my parents were living in Chihuahua, Mexico. I flew down to see them since I work in the States. Turns out a friend from childhood was living there as well, so we decided to meet for a drink. It was my first time in that city. We are from another state, but my dad used to move a lot for work. I borrowed my dad's car and we drove to a bar. As we were parking the car in front of the bar, 3 guys are leaving holding AK-47s. Let's get the out of here. I said I was paralyzed but managed to back up the car, but they walked in front of it before I could leave. One of them stayed in the middle of the street while the other 2 got their truck. So there we were in the middle of the street staring directly at this dude with the gun looking right at us. He slowly walked to the truck still looking at us, jumped in, and they left. We drove home pretty paranoid and just had a drink there. Edit. I don't know what happened inside that bar. There was nothing on the news the next day. Something like that happened to me, but in Reynosa, there were some protests and closed roads for a couple of days, but you never knew which street they were taking. I was trying to go to work outside the city and got stuck in traffic. After a couple of minutes and some cars taking an off-road shortcut, freeing some space, I saw a guy with the National Oil Company's uniform walking by and asked him what was going on. He told me there were people on the road blocking, but didn't know more. I don't know know why I felt the need to leave immediately and saw a chance to jump the central ridge between two trees. Luckily, I had a Jeep high enough to make it. Went back to my house in a rush. Less than 10 minutes later, I was making calls to say I wasn't coming to work. My BF called me to ask where I was as gunmen were burning buses in the main street and then a shooting started. I was safe, but it was awful, as lots of my friends and coworkers' family members were trapped between crossfire. Some of them were trying to hide, and others spend like 8 hours in stores, schools, and offices lying flat on the ground. The cartel took all city as hostage. Horrible. You could heard the shootings and bombings. It sounded like a bad war movie. Your brain can't process it as real. I'm a touring musician. At one point in time, my tour vehicle broke down in bumfuck Mississippi. We were able to pull into a gas station, but had thrown a belt and needed to get it replaced. Cue a bunch of hicks helping us work on our car. A couple of band members rode with a random do-gooder to go get a replacement belt 45 minutes away. The local sheriff pulled up and bought us all Coca-Cola. At this point, we're stressed because we don't want to miss our next show in Arkansas, but not worried about safety. Time stretched, and through trial and error, we ended up getting things close to finished up. Then our lead guitarist pulls out his iPhone. He said he had an airdrop request, but we all kinda ignored it until the job was finished. Then just as we're getting into the car to pull away, he opens the airdrop. There were 7 pictures of dead bodies, although they appeared to be cleaned up like in a morgue or something. Still freaking creepy. The last 2 pictures were of us repairing the car in the gas station parking lot. After that, we lost our shit, and whether we were just freaked or it was genuine, the car behind us followed us for almost 20 miles until we got to a major highway and gunned it. No other context, but it still freaks all of us out to this day. Edit, bonus, creep points I forgot to mention. Among the corpse pictures was a picture of one woman sitting up and smiling at the camera. The next shot, she was dead. I was working nights when I was younger and was deep asleep when my brother ran into my room yelling, "We gotta go now." I panic, wake up, and just run out the door, get in the car with him and my dad, still trying to get my senses about me. We're driving, and my dad turns on the radio and there's a tornado hitting our town. We didn't have a storm shelter, so we were rushing to my mom's work. The meteorologist comes over the radio saying it's going to hit these cross streets any minute. We're literally sitting at a stop sign at those cross streets. My brother and I start panicking for my dad to just floor it like, "We gotta go now." We thankfully just missed it, but between being woke up and finally realizing what was going on in that moment, I was terrified. Oh my, I had a similar situation when I lived in the Caribbean. There was a hurricane approaching, and so we decided to drive to the shelter. As soon as we got in the car, this horrible wind started that tipped our car over, so we got inside. It took us 15 minutes to get inside BC. We kept getting blown away. It was really scary. This was years ago. My older cousin, 17 at the time, took my little brother, 5, and sister, 7, and me, 9, out in a big city we lived near, and we were standing at this bus stop that was at a small square grass park, probably about 200 feet across. It was January, and the park was surrounded by short bushes that still had Christmas lights on them. My brother and I began to wander, and my brother wandered a bit further than me, following a string of lights. A few minutes later, I get this weird feeling, and my head shoots up, and about 30 feet away is my brother speaking with this old, dirty man. I saw the man reach his hand towards my brother, and I heard him say, "If you like Christmas lights, I have some really nice ones over here you'd love." My brother grabbed his hand, and they both started to walk away, but I caught up before they could turn the corner and snatched my brother back. The man immediately turned around and hurried away without a word, and I was too young and scared and confused to confront him. I never told anyone about it until years later for some reason, but I was so overwhelmed with the thought that I had just experienced one of those moments that could have completely altered my life in a matter of seconds. If I had looked up 5 seconds later, they would have turned the corner and disappeared into the city without a trace. Met this cute girl at a party, spent the whole night dancing and flirting, offered to drive her home, and she agreed. We were making out in the car in front of her house when another car pulls up with their headlights beaming at us. I ask if that's a neighbor and if we're blocking their driveway. She replies, "No, that's my husband." Husband's car door opens and I noped the out of there, dropped her straight back at the party and never saw her again. Her excuse was that they were separated and he shouldn't have a problem with it. I sure wasn't sticking around to find out. Edit. Holy shit, that's a lot of upvotes. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing everyone's similar stories. Thank you all. You and I have a similar story with very different endings. She went to a party to find someone to kick her ex-BF's ass. Asterisk edit. I didn't know about this part until after. I just went home with her to smash. I pulled into her driveway and a car blocked me in, and 4 guys guys pulled up on me. I had no idea what was going on, and before I could get 2 words out, one of them smashed a 40 ounces bottle over my head. Somehow I managed to stay on my feet and put up enough of a fight they ran off. Likely had a lot to do with all the blood. My socks were soaking wet. Late afternoon in the summer, I'm waiting in the bus station near my house. Most businesses are closed, not a lot of cars in the street. Guy passes in front of me. He passes again 2 minutes later, watching me suspiciously. Alarms start to go in my head, screaming to me that I need to leave and get the off here, but I ignore it since the bus will come in 10 minutes. Third time he passes, he charges to me, pushing me to the wall with his cock out. I freeze for some seconds, then start punching and kicking him. I manage to get away, and the rest is history. Yeah, trust your guts, guys. If something like that happens again, take out your phone and call someone. Talk loudly, tell them where you are, and just stay on the phone until either someone picks you up or the bus comes. I had a weird thing where someone who was walking in front of me on my way home from the train cut through the woods and he ended up behind me. I was only a few streets from home, but I called my mom and let her know what was up. She met me on the other side of the park with the dog in the car. The guy sped up and passed me at that point. It could have been nothing, but it could have been something also. Better safe than sorry. My friend invited me to a seminar. Everyone were dressed in white shirt and black pant with black shoes. I was odd one out in here. For some weird reason, they were praising Founder as if he was some kind of god. When I went into the auditorium, they were showing how these 17-year-olds were earning Rs. $200,000 in a month, which is heck of a lot in India, translated to about $3,500, with their own bikes, cars, and shit like that. Then it dawned upon me that this is eerily similar to one of the biggest scam and that used similar business model about 7 years ago at the time. I really wanted to move out ASAP. My brainwashed friend was sitting a few row behind me. All of those involved in this marketing were required to do so for weird reason. It was cringy at best and exploitative at worst. Never caught up with him ever since. That friend of mine wasn't really bad person or anything. He didn't even force me to buy the product or anything. Maybe due to the fact that I studied in different city. The product seemed really good from outside, but the method of selling really looked like one for MLM. There was another person in that group who was from my school, didn't know him in any way, who forced one of my family friend, went to same school, to buy that product. He then resorted to swearing and abused her online for not buying the product. I'm not sure if it is a full-fledged MLM because the participants weren't forced to buy product in bulk. Probably because all of them were students. I don't recall the name of the company, so IDK, how is that company still doing? My friend and I, both females, met up our first time back home from college. It was a surprisingly nice day outside in the middle of winter, so we decided to get lunch and eat outside. We found a park that had no one there and were sitting at a picnic table catching up when I see a scruffy looking guy in a large work van with no rear windows pull into the parking lot. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him at first, but I noticed he was moving around the outside of the van for a bit and he kept looking our way. He finally walked down the sidewalk toward us and passed by our picnic table and walked around the backside of the restroom building to look down the hill on the other side of it, very obviously casing out the place. He walked back to his van and me and my friend were discussing what we were going to do while I watched him open up the back of the van and start digging around it. He made a call on his cell phone and a few minutes later, another male pulled up in a different car. He got out and started talking to the first guy who not very discreetly pointed our direction. They immediately started walking toward us and my friend and I scooped what was left of lunch and fast walked out of the place while keeping an eye on them. One of the times in my life I could literally feel the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. It could have been nothing, but even now I feel pretty certain that they had something planned and I'm glad we left. It was early 2019 and I was with my girlfriend at the time, walking through the woods near my house as we often did. We were having an intense argument over something stupid when I noticed something through the trees off the trail to where we were walking. It was a man wearing a dark top and blue jeans. People came in this woods all the time, but what was weird is this man wasn't on any trails, he was in the middle of the overgrowth. I told her to shut up. I know, bad idea, especially in an argument, and she just got madder at me. I told her again and told her to look in the direction I was looking. At first, she didn't see what I was talking about, so I told her to look for blue since the man's jeans stood out the most. Then she saw him, a man walking through the overgrowth following us. I didn't know who this guy was, but he looked older. Still, I wasn't taking any chances, especially with my girlfriend there, so I told her, let's go, we have to leave, and we walked faster. The trouble was, we were in the middle of nowhere and far from any exit. exits. And to be honest, my girlfriend at the time wasn't exactly physically fit, so walking fast was hard for her. We walked as fast as she could, and I kept looking behind us, and that old man was still following us in the overgrowth, obviously trying to remain hidden. We ended up leaving the woods and never going back there together. I've been back there many times since alone, and have had a few strange encounters with another person that looks kinda like the old man, but I can't say for sure it's the same guy, as he is always watching from afar. He never does anything besides follow from a distance, but I've seen him a total of 3 times. Spooky. When I was 15, a friend and I went for a lot of walks around town. Small town, around 5-6K people. We were going to the cyber cafe in town to meet a few friends, and we often took different streets to get places, just to keep it interesting. We were about to go to Main Street off one of the side streets, and a man on a bicycle approached us. He got off his bike and asked us a couple small talk questions. Something didn't seem right about him. He was probably mid-40s. We both kept inching away, but didn't want to come off as too rude, so we answered about the weather or traffic. Then he paused and we said we had to go, and he said, and I'll never forget it, "You look so young. I don't want to get in trouble, but I need to touch someone. I just need to touch you. You should come with me." And he started rambling. I just felt terror. Couldn't even speak. I grabbed my friend's hand and turned. We sprinted the rest of the way to the cafe, and as soon as we were inside, we asked to use the phone. I called my mom to pick us up while my friend told the worker what happened and what the guy looked like. A month later, I got my first cell phone. I posted this in a similar one of these threads a couple of months ago, but I'll paste it over here. I used to drive for Lyft. April 2018, I picked up a young couple from a bar at about 1:30 a.m. They were fairly chill, and I figured it would be my last ride of the night. The dude asked me to stop at a corner store on the way to their destination so that he could get cigarettes. I didn't see any harm in waiting, so I stopped and had a nice chat with the young woman while he was in the store. He ended up being about 5 minutes since everyone was trying to get their pre-2 a.m. beer. When he came out, he asked me to take him to a location that was in the opposite direction of their destination, but was only about a mile away. He said he wanted to meet some friends real quick and grab some beer. Since I figured it would be my last ride of the night, I said, why not? And drive him over there. Now, I know the town we live in fairly well, but the direction that we were coming from was not a way I was used to going when I would go to this location. So when I turned onto the destination street, I missed the turn into the complex parking lot. I just came to a complete stop since the roads were empty and asked them if they just wanted me to park on the street or pull into the complex. This is when the two of them started arguing, as he suddenly wanted to go in and hang out for a few minutes while she didn't want to go in at all. She just wanted him to do his thing and get out of there so they could go home. And then something hit my car. The sound is unmistakable to me, so I immediately started to look around to figure out what it was. But there were no other cars on the road, so that couldn't have been it. Then I moved to the next thing on my mental checklist. If something didn't hit me, then what did I hit? But that didn't make any sense either, as I'd been in park and couldn't have hit anything. It's at this point that the young lady's attitude completely changed. She just kinda looked around and then said, "Can we just get out of here? It hurts, and I want to go home." This was odd to me, as she'd been sitting in my car for about 10 minutes at this point and hadn't said a word about any kind of pain. She followed this up with "it hurts and I can't move," put her hand to her back and pulled it out covered in blood. What the f? So the guy starts freaking out, thinking that something in my trunk had exploded, but it was empty. As he reached over to tend to her, I noticed something white sticking out of the seat. This hadn't been there at the beginning of the night, so I asked him what it was. He pulled on it. It was a piece of the filler fuzz from my seat. It came out of the hole that had been made in the seat because she'd been shot. As soon he grabbed that fuzz, we both had the same realization. He slammed shut his door and I drove them straight to the hospital, which was only a couple of miles away. That realization and the follow-up realization of, oh, someone could still shoot you while you're sitting here, was one of the most terrifying things I'd ever experienced. In China, on a school trip, wandering around night market stalls of fried bugs and bull testicles in a group of 10 or so high school age kids. A 50-60-ish YO Chinese man engages us in conversation, claiming to be the curator of a local art gallery. Do we want to check out some paintings? Sure, we were bored and had lost our appetite pretty quickly anyhow. Well, we get to the gallery, which was a semi-rundown 5x5 M building. The Chinese man talks to us from the doorway, inviting us in to see the paintings which are downstairs. The building is in the middle of a large paved courtyard, right next to a popular tourist destination. It's safe, right? Peering through the doorway, no artwork or obvious function to the building is visible. An entrance lamp is broken with its glass scattered over the doorway, and inside, shoddy steps lead to a dank, unlit basement. One of us interrupts Chinese man sweet-talking, come down, see painting, to grill him on the broken glass. Don't worry, many paintings, beautiful. No, tell me why there's broken glass. At this point, we're all exchanging glances when I get the urge to break our collective stupor by yelling, "Cheese it!" As a group, we turned the tail into a sprint, covering 100 yards or so before we slowed down to laugh and crack jokes about kidnapping and Oregon black markets. Glad it was the best memory from my trip and not the last one. Viewing to see a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mom told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London, UK. I will do my best to retell it. Also, I'm dyslexic, so apologies in advance for grammar. This story always gives me the creeps though when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mom was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly out from the area she was hoping. She'd called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. So the guy booking the viewing started asking weird requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. Would she be coming on her own? Did she have a car, or would she be getting the bus? He very persistent that she should arrive by bus as it would be easiest for her. Explains it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested because the flat looked ideal. She and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing, they drove there. First passing the bus stop, he was indicating her to arrive via. From the bus stop, there was about 152 hundredths meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat. And standing at the end of the street in the location this apartment block should have been was a huge abandoned building. Smashed broken windows, graffiti, no entry signs, the lot. Definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells this today, you can see how much it rightly shook her. Of course, she didn't go to her viewing. However, she informed the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw, from following up with them, they didn't appear to take this tip seriously and little was done. A couple years later though, while in a pub with some friends, she gets chatting to a guy she just met through mutual friends that night. He was in the police, and through conversation her story came up. He said that that area at the time of her viewing had a huge human trafficking problem. Still gives me chills. When I was a kid, an adult patted my head and I developed an instant inexplicable loathing for him and refused to be alone with him. My parents told me I was being ridiculous and forced me to be around him. He was later sent to prison for abuse of a girl. Oh yeah, trust your gut. When my dad was in his 20s, he was on a trip to the beach with friends, but they only had one car. Last day, they all pile in the car to drive home, but dad got a weird feeling and decided to stay longer and get the bus back, even though it meant his mom would be super mad at him as she had some work for him to do. Car made it all the way back to their hometown and was T-boned in an intersection in the main street. All 4 of his friends in the car died. I hope your dad is in a better place mentally. That must be such a horrible feeling. That's tragic, and you have my condolences. Well, it was 50 plus years ago, so I would hope he's come to terms with it, but he only really tells it as an interesting story. He never really talks about how it made him feel. It's that generation, I guess. I was walking down the street in a very unfamiliar city with a group of friends. I got this feeling and didn't know how to articulate it, so I said to the group, "Hey, I've got to use the restroom. Can we just duck inside this subway real quick? I promise I'll be quick." About a minute later, there was a shootout just up the block. If we wouldn't have gone into the restaurant, we would have all been standing right in the middle of the incident waiting to cross the street. I was scuba diving in Asia. 3 of us went to a reef that hadn't been dived on before, which bottomed out at 50-70 m depth. 5 minutes into the dive, we all get a very bad feeling like we were being watched. Ignored it, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Further 10 minutes into the dive, we all watched the silhouette of a white shark glide slowly past, right on the periphery of where we could see, then glide back in the other direction a minute later. The decompression stop to get out was the scariest 3 minutes of my life. The sea is like space on Earth. Doesn't I need to go home now feeling count? And it wasn't me, but my mom. Anyway, I was around 12 or so, and my mom left to run an errand, leaving me alone. Very soon after she left, the doorbell rang. This was weird because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors. We all kept to ourselves, and we just didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see out the door without being seen. I look out and see a young man I don't recognize. He's dressed in a shirt and jeans, and something just feels off. So I ignore him and wait for him to leave, but he doesn't. He lingers and starts smoking. Again, this is an isolated hill. I'm alone, and now I'm getting scared. I go and hide and plan to wait for my mom, except she just left, had a few errands to run, and I couldn't reach the phone without the guy seeing me. As I'm trying to figure out what to do, my mom comes home. She runs in and asks if I'm okay. Apparently she got this random go home now urge. She hadn't even run her first errand yet, but turned around immediately, found the guy in our yard and asked what he needed. I guess he muttered something about looking for someone or something to that effect, and my mom told him to leave. Apparently he was acting very strangely and made my mom nervous. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted and no idea how my mom knew to come home, but I am very grateful she did. When I was about 12, my mom randomly woke up one night and suddenly had the urge to check on me for no reason whatsoever. I'd just woken up with nausea and stomach pains when she came into the room, but I hadn't made any noise or called out. Went straight to the hospital where I was in surgery having my appendix out within 2 hours. Mom intuition is weird and real. We've had the same thing when our nephew was sick. Our family was poor, so we sleep in the same room. While sleeping, we all, probably 5 people, suddenly woke up at the same time, like we sat up, woke up kind of thing. Then my nephew had seizures right after. Grew up along the Gulf Coast. Daily storms in the summer were normal. We were heading home when one came in really quick. All of us were elementary or junior high age. We were crossing 2 wide open football fields. All of our hair was standing straight up in the air. We knew that meant lightning was imminent. A car was driving past, jumped the curb, and drove up to us. We all got into the car, and she slowly rolled back to the street. We went another block, and the lightning struck the goalpost. It was so close. Was never afraid of lighting until then. That was around 1979. I'm 57 and don't mess around. The one story in this entire post that ends with, and so I got into the stranger's car. I was freshly married in my early 20 SS, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, ex, was a Marine and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along this long, dark, and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road, and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive, but something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently, there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking/robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved I listened to my instincts that night. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy abbed his blonde girlfriend, kept babbling at us about taking headshots and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5'8" and not a small girl, saying 13 years old. I was 4, 9, and around 65 pounds at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. Wow, I just went down a 2:30 a.m. Wikipedia deep dive on this. How wild that you were so close to being a victim. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion, but just for family within reasonable driving distance. Probably 30 people all together. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings. Just an empty hall hall with some picnic tables inside. You could rent for this kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, balls, and other kids' toys, etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are common just about every day in the summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right, even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. Hair on my neck was standing up and I was in full flight mode. Can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently, I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet, and I was full on panic, yelling for everyone to leave. Something isn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car, and as soon as I was about to turn the key, the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they put those, or they are just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake maybe a few miles in the distance and see a funnel cloud. Got the hell out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for this family BBQ thing was completely annihilated. Literally just a slab of concrete and a shit ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an EF3. There's something about the air before a tornado. I had a similar experience when I was in HS, babysitting two young girls. We were in their living room playing next to a big picture window, and I remember looking outside, noticing how it suddenly became very dark and still. I moved them to the other room without windows so they wouldn't get worried. 5 minutes later, my mom texted to make sure we were inside. The sirens were going off in her hometown, about 20 miles away. It was being obliterated. 200-year-old brick churches torn in half. Thankfully, all the damage was material. When I was a teenager, me and some friends were hanging out around midnight. A caravan drives past slowly with a few people looking out the windows. We all look at each other quiet, and the caravan pulls into a nearby parking space. We all get up and walk to our bikes because something feels really off. A few minutes later, we hear someone shout, and as I turned around, there was about 5 or 6 people getting out with metal pipes and other things in hands. We ran so fast nothing happened, but I'm 99% sure we were about to get beaten and robbed. Years ago, I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw 2 guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend. She was barely 5 tall and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time, and the rest of the party followed me outside telling me to put her down. When we got outside, we heard the distant pop pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second, then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update? Dang, I didn't think this would blow up. It was the early 1990s and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between 2 groups. No one was killed, but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today. The legend are false. Those 2 eventually got married and they mentioned me in their speech, something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. About 3 weeks ago now, I was blackwater diving off the coast of Boynton Beach, Florida. For those that don't know, blackwater diving involved being dumped with a light buoy to drift over hundreds of feet of water in the Gulf Stream at night. The light buoy attracts all sorts of alien critters that come up from the deep to feed, so it's a lot of fun for underwater photographers. Needless to say, as a precaution, all divers must at minimum wear a light on their tank to be seen, and I had accidentally grabbed my blue blinky light. Before I was going to jump in, the captain mentioned that blue blinking lights were used by fishermen to attract big things at night. As a regular shark diver, there's not too much I'm afraid of down there, but something sent a chill down my spine and I switched my light for a regular green glow stick. That very same night, a legendary blackwater diver was on another boat a couple miles north and got full on impaled in the leg by a huge swordfish. The fish ripped the sword out of his leg and then kept beating him with it, the way they hunt for the big squid down deep. Dude had his leg torn up and had to self-rescue himself from about 100 feet of depth. No idea if he'll be able to walk, let alone dive again. I've never heard of blackwater diving that's so interesting and super creepy. Got any more stories? I'm quite new at it, but the stories from the old timers are wild. Squid the size of dogs, baby octopus riding jellyfish, 16 feet long, blanket octopus unfurling their blankets. Random passes by makos, orcas, and great whites. Once you're that far out into the ocean, almost anything can happen. Picture it, 1994. I was 18 and waitressing in a sports bar. A comedy club was upstairs. One night, a comedian kept visiting between sets. He was funny and charming, and he seemed quite smitten with me. He asked me out to late night breakfast. If you've ever been in hospitality, you know we go out and eat at 3 a.m. I changed after my shift and waited a few minutes for him. I realized I really didn't know this person and I should not let him in my car. I decided to be smart in GTFO. A few years later, I was absentmindedly flipping through a People magazine at a friend's house. That is when I saw my comedian date, Vince Champ, had been arrested as a serial rapist. His favorite target was young college girls, and they finally caught him after putting the puzzle together between victims and his campus circuit. Holy shit, I dodged a bullet. I think he may still be in jail. He was that terrible. A shady looking guy told me to come here when I was waiting for my mom under the apartment building. I was about 10. I ran upstairs immediately without looking back. Looking back as a 25-year-old, I couldn't imagine why any normal adult would need to speak to a random 10-year-old unless the kid looks lost or is doing something dangerous. Glad I bolted. Around that age, I was walking my dog around the block and one of our neighbors on the street over introduced himself to me, complimented my little dog. I felt very grown up talking with him. Then he told me he was sad his puppy ran away into the woods behind the neighborhood. Could I please come with him? As a dog lover, he just knew his puppy would come out of hiding if he saw my dog playing in the woods with us. Now, as an adult, I too realize that it is not normal for someone to ask a child they don't know to come with them to another location. So creepy. Dumb as I was, I had no ill feelings. My dog was kinda old and hated playing, so I told him I had to go home, saved my own life. I was a stupid, trusting kid that happened to have a boring old dog. In 2012, I drove across the country from Philly to LA with a good friend of mine. I'm a big guy, she's a smaller woman. Just for context, we camped the whole way out. The plan was to get to LA, drop her off at her new apartment, and then I'd fly home. She couldn't get into her apartment until Wednesday morning, and we arrived outside of LA on Tuesday evening. We didn't have money for hotels or anything, so we camped in Angeles National Forest. No idea why, but I had a weird feeling being this close to a major city and camping. Felt like a bad vibe, but we got there and set up before dark and ate dinner. My friend asked, if you could see any animal tonight, what would you want to see? And I swear, I said not a person. When we arrived, there was only one other campsite set up at the campground, and they were around the bend from us. We saw the guy who was camping there. Anyway, we go to sleep. At some point, it's dark, and I wake up. There's a flashlight shining around our tent. I figure it's just another campsite that arrived after we fell asleep. Then I hear clear as day a man's voice right outside the door of my tent say, "Who's in there? Who's in that tent?" My friend woke up and said, "Hello." So it wasn't just me that heard it. We both said, "Hello? Who's that?" But got no response. Didn't really hear anyone walk away. Didn't see a flashlight. I freaked the fuck out. Why the hell would someone knock on our tent in the middle of the night? I grabbed my headlamp and my knife and I zipped open the tent and jumped out really fast in case he was waiting to bonk me on the head. But no one was there. I looked everywhere and there was no one. No other campsite. My friend said we should just go back to sleep, but I was too scared. It was 4 a.m. and raining, and I told her we needed to leave right fucking now. She said I was scaring her, and I said good, and we threw everything in the car, all wet and crumpled up, and started to leave. On the way out on the road in the campsite, we saw what I presumed was the guy. He wasn't the other guy from the other campsite, just some random guy walking back towards our site. I cracked the window as we passed him and said, "Dude, what the fuck?" And all he said was, "Sorry for freaking you guys out," and kept walking back towards where we had camped. We booked it the fuck out of there and drove straight to Santa Monica because we had no idea what else to do. I have no fucking idea why he did that, but it scared the ever-living piss out of me. Still haven't camped in Angeles since then, but I'm actually going again this summer. This happened about 2 years ago. I was 16, just barely got my driver's license a month or two prior, and was headed to martial arts class with my 13-year-old brother. Class started at 7 p.m. and it was mid-December, so even though we left at around 6:30, it was still quite dark outside. As I was driving to karate, I noticed yellow headlights blaring behind me. I couldn't see the car very well because of how dark it was, but the headlights alone made the car as noticeable as possible. possible. I kept driving, but the closer I got to the karate studio, the more I noticed the lights still behind me. It was starting to freak me out a bit, especially since this car had been following us for about 7-ish minutes now. I remembered hearing a tip online about taking 4 right turns to see if a car is actually following you or not, because if the car follows through all of those turns, they would have just gone in a full circle, and no sensible driver would do that. So I decided to do so at the next intersection. Sure enough, the yellow headlights were still there, shining directly at me after I'd made my 4 right turns. Trying not to panic, I pulled into a well-lit gas station to try and get a better look at the car. The car followed, so I instructed my brother to snap a quick picture, then to call 911. As before he dialed the number phone out, the car veered out of the gas station and started speeding down the road, leaving us alone. I assume because they saw us take a picture of their car, including their license plate. I called 911 anyways, gave them the details of the car, and explained what happened, and waited at the gas station a little longer before leaving in the opposite direction. We didn't go to karate that night, and instead took a very roundabout way home, and I made sure to be as confusing and hard to follow as I possibly could. No yellow headlights followed us. We then locked the entire house when we arrived home, just to be safe, and we were left completely unbothered. To this day, I'm not sure what happened to that car, if any arrests were made, etc., but I still think I dodged a bullet, especially considering that we were just 2 minors in a car driving fairly late at night.
If you want, you can like and subscribe.